Arya Velen sat quietly inside the transport ship as it moved through the dark stretch of space. She kept her hands folded together on her lap, her thumb brushing nervously across her fingers. The steady hum of the engines filled the cabin, and soft blue lights glowed along the walls. She could hear faint voices from the front of the ship, officers talking to each other, their tone calm and confident. They did not look at her. They did not seem to care that she was there. To them, she was only a new cadet who had no real experience. A small hologram hovered in the air in front of her seat. It showed her official file, the same file every officer on board had already seen. The words glowed bright and harsh in the dim cabin. The line that always caught her attention stood out like a scar. 0 combat hours, inexperienced, not essential. She stared at it for a long moment. Even though she had already memorized every detail of the report, the file told a story that was not true, but there was no way to explain that without revealing things. She was not ready to share. She shifted her eyes toward the window. Outside, stars drifted by like cold, silent dust. Somewhere beyond those stars was her mother's memory, a memory that lived only inside her now. Her mother had taught her everything that mattered. Not through formal lessons, but through long nights of quiet training, through whispered warnings, and through stories of war that were never written in books. Arya still remembered the last night with her. Her mother's voice had been tired but strong as she told Arya to trust her instincts, to look past what people said, and to find her own path when the time came, but no one on this ship knew any of that. To them, she was just a teenage girl who had graduated early, placed in a peaceful sector where she could not make mistakes big enough to matter. She knew what they thought because she had heard the whispers. Poor kid. Sent here because she's too green for real duty. She file reports and monitor screens. That's all she can handle. She won't see a real battle out here. Arya closed her eyes for a moment and breathed slowly. She told herself she did not care. She told herself she could handle their doubt. But deep inside, something sharp twisted. She wanted to prove them wrong, not for fame or pride, but because she knew she could help. She knew she had skills no one believed she had. The transport finally shook gently as it began its descent toward the surface of Zarian 6. A frontier colony on the outer rim. The world came into view through the window. The planet was covered in silver plains and wide open valleys, with long rivers that reflected the sun like glass. From above, it looked peaceful, almost too peaceful for a place that had been added to the defense list. When the ship landed, Arya stepped out into the cold morning air. The sky above her was pale blue, and the ground beneath her boots felt firm and dry. A few workers moved crates from one building to another, and 2 guards stood near the gate with relaxed expressions. Nothing here looked dangerous. Nothing here looked like a place that needed real soldiers. A tall officer approached her. He wore dark armor and carried a tablet in his hand. He looked at her, then at the file displayed on his screen. "Cadet Arya Velen?" He asked. "Yes, sir," she said in a calm voice. He nodded. He did not smile. "You'll be assigned to the monitoring division. We don't expect high activity in this sector, so your job will be simple. Scan incoming signals, track ship movements, respond to minor alerts. Standard work for new recruits?" Arya nodded. She already knew this. She had already read the assignment list before landing. "Follow me," the officer said. He led her through the main base. The buildings were small, made from metal panels and reinforced with thick support beams. Most of the people she passed wore quiet expressions, as if they were used to routine and repetition. The colony seemed calm, but Arya felt something strange in the air, like a soft vibration she could not explain. She kept noticing details others ignored: the timing of patrol routes, the pattern of shifts, the small delays in communication screens. None of it was serious, but together it made her uneasy. They reached the monitoring room, a small circular space filled with screens and floating displays. 3 other cadets sat inside, leaning back in their chairs, talking softly. They looked up when Arya entered, but their eyes lacked curiosity. "This is your place," the officer said. "You'll take the night shift starting tomorrow. Until then, learn the system." He turned and walked away. Arya took her seat and placed her hand on the touchpad. The screen lit up with maps of the surrounding space. Several dots marked the locations of friendly ships. Everything appeared calm and orderly. She tried to focus on learning the controls, but her mind kept drifting toward that strange feeling she had sensed earlier. Hours passed. She watched the monitors, listened to soft beeps and quiet alerts, and scanned through reports. Nothing out of the ordinary appeared. Yet the longer she sat there, the stronger her uneasiness grew. She checked the long-range scanners again. A faint signal flickered at the far edge of the map, then vanished. It was too weak to track, but it did not feel random. She leaned closer to the screen, narrowing her eyes. "What was that?" she whispered. Before she could investigate further, one of the cadets laughed behind her. "Relax, new girl. You're staring at the screen like it's about to explode." Arya forced a small smile. "Just trying to learn everything." "You won't find anything exciting here," another cadet said. "This sector is quiet. We call it the sleep zone." Arya pretended to agree, but her instincts whispered differently. She had spent too many nights listening to her mother talk about hidden threats, early warnings, and signs people overlook until it is too late. Arya could not ignore that faint signal. When her shift ended, she stepped outside and walked alone across the base. The sky was turning dark, and the distant mountains glowed faintly under the setting sun. She paused to look around. The air was still, almost too still, as if the world was holding its breath. A soft memory rose in her mind. Her mother's voice. Her mother's hand resting gently on her shoulder. "When the world feels quiet," her mother had said, "listen even harder. Danger hides inside silence." Arya breathed deeply, letting the cold air fill her lungs. She tried to push away her worry, but the feeling would not leave. She walked to the edge of the base and stared at the long stretch of plains. Somewhere out there, beyond what she could see, something was moving. Something was coming. She turned back toward the base and whispered to herself, "They don't see it." "But I do." Over the next few days, Arya continued her work. She monitored screens, scanned reports, and followed routine procedures. The officers treated her politely but distantly. The cadets still thought she was harmless. But every night that strange flicker on the scanner returned for a brief moment. And every night, Arya watched it slip away before she could lock onto it. She started adjusting the sensitivity of the scanners during her shift. She did not have permission, but she made only small changes, careful not to be noticed. She reviewed old data records and compared movement patterns. Something did not make sense. The flicker was not random. It appeared at equal intervals, following a curved path around the sector. It was scouting. She was certain, but no one believed her when she tried to explain. "Cadet, this sector is safe," an officer said with an annoyed sigh. "There is no enemy movement anywhere near us." "You're reading too much into simple scanner noise," another added. A third officer smiled politely. "You're new. You'll learn to relax soon." "Nothing ever happens here?" Arya stood straight, her hands hidden behind her back. She felt frustration rise inside her, but she kept her voice calm. "Sir, I understand. But I still think we should at least run a deeper scan." "No need," the officer said before walking away. That night, Arya sat alone in the monitoring room again. She stared at the stars on the screen. She did not know when the threat would arrive or how strong it would be. But she knew one thing clearly: the colony was not ready, and no one was preparing. If anything happened, they would be caught off guard. Arya tightened her grip on the edge of the table. She would not let that happen. She refused to let her mother's lessons fade into nothing. She would pay attention even if others refused. She would be ready even if they were not. Outside the base, unseen by human eyes, something large and silent moved through the shadows of space. A ship with dark wings and sharp edges passed through the void, its surface absorbing all light. It paused, scanning the colony below. Then it drifted back into the darkness, leaving only a faint echo behind. Arya did not see it. But she felt it. The storm was coming. And she was the only one who knew. The night on Xyrian 6 felt heavier than usual. The sky above the colony was dark and wide, sprinkled with silver stars that flickered like distant warnings. Arya Velen walked toward the monitoring room with slow steps, her mind restless. Every breath she took felt tight in her chest. She wished she could shake the feeling that something was about to go terribly wrong, but she could not. The strange signals she had been noticing for days kept returning to her thoughts. When she entered the monitoring room, only one cadet sat inside, half asleep in his chair. He glanced at her, then looked away without a word. Arya quietly took her seat and placed her hand on the controls. The screens lit up around her, bathing the room in cool blue light. She scanned the maps again. Everything looked normal, just like the officers always said. But she knew it was not. She leaned closer to the display and changed the filter settings. This time, she pushed the sensitivity a little higher than before. A soft beep echoed in the room, and a tiny dot blinked far outside the safe zone. Her heart skipped. "There you are," she whispered. The dot flickered again, then vanished as if someone had wiped it away. But Arya had seen enough. She started recording everything. She checked the time pattern, the signal strength, the direction. All the readings matched her theory. Something was circling the colony at a distance watching. She hesitated only for a moment before standing up. She walked toward the communication bridge and contacted the nearest officer. When his tired face appeared on the screen, he looked annoyed. "What is it, cadet?" he asked. "Sir, I have detected a repeated signal near the outer range," Arya said. "It is moving in a curved pattern." "I believe it may be a scout." He raised a hand. "Arya, we have talked about this. You are reading noise? You are stressing yourself over nothing." "But, sir, no enemy ships have entered this sector in months," he said firmly. "Stand down and continue your shift." The screen went dark. Arya stood still for several seconds. She wanted to argue, but it would not have changed anything. No one believed her. No one would take action unless they saw danger with their own eyes. She returned to her seat and watched the screen again. Hours passed slowly. The room was silent except for the soft hum of machines. The cadet behind her eventually fell asleep, but Arya remained alert. Suddenly, the alarm system let out a faint warning chime. Not loud, not urgent, just a soft tone, the kind that did not draw attention. But Arya reacted immediately. She checked the display. The dot was back. This time, it was much closer. Her breath caught in her throat. Then the signal multiplied. One dot became 3, 3 became 6, 6 became a cluster. Arya's eyes widened. She slammed her hand on the emergency alert button, but instead of a loud alarm, a notification appeared on the screen saying the alert required officer approval. "What?" she whispered in disbelief. She tried again, but the same message appeared. She looked over her shoulder. The cadet was still asleep. Arya hurried to manual override. She typed in the command code she had memorized. Her hands shook slightly, but she kept going. The system hesitated for 2 seconds, then accepted the override. The colony's main alarm finally erupted. Red lights flashed through every hallway. The cadet behind her woke up so quickly he almost fell out of his chair. "What did you do?" he shouted in confusion. Arya did not answer him. She was already sending the incoming data to the main base. She watched as the cluster of signals moved closer. Now too fast to be anything friendly, the officer she had contacted earlier appeared on her screen again. This time his face had no annoyance, only shock. "Where did these come from?" he demanded. "They were always there," Arya said in a calm voice. "You just did not see them." Before he could respond, a loud explosion shook the base. The ground trembled beneath Arya's feet. Dust fell from the ceiling. The cadet grabbed the table to steady himself. The officer shouted orders at someone behind him. Before the screen cut out, Arya ran to the window. A fiery streak fell from the sky and crashed into the far side of the colony. A second one followed. Then a third. The attack had begun. Screams and shouts filled the air. Soldiers rushed out of their quarters. Officers barked orders. The sound of weapons charging and shields activating echoed across the base. Arya stepped out of the monitoring room and felt the night turn into chaos around her. She hurried toward the central plaza where people were gathering. Explosions lit up the sky like red lightning. Somewhere in the distance, structures collapsed with heavy crashes. A large shadow passed overhead. Arya looked up and saw a dark ship with sharp edges gliding silently through the air. It released a wave of drones that swarmed down like metal insects. The Karvex had arrived. Arya had never seen them in person, but she recognized their weapons from her mother's stories. She watched the drones' fire energy burst at the shield towers. One tower cracked, flickered, and went dark. Soldiers fired back, but their shots missed. The drones moved fast, almost too fast to track. A group of officers gathered near the plaza steps. They shouted at each other, trying to decide what to do. Arya ran to them. "Sir, we need to reroute the shield energy to the inner towers," she said. "The outer ones will fall too quickly." One officer turned to her with anger. "Cadet, this is not your place. Go to the bunker." Another explosion cut him off as a drone crashed just meters away. The force knocked several soldiers to the ground. Arya steadied herself. "Sir, listen. They are targeting the outer grid first. If you do not reinforce the inner towers, the shields will collapse in less than 5 minutes." A younger officer looked at his tablet, checked the readings, and swallowed. "She's right," he said. "The pattern matches her report?" The senior officer froze for a moment, then shouted, "Fine. Reroute the energy now. Move!" Arya did not wait for more instructions. She grabbed the fallen officer's tablet, sprinted toward the control station, and began typing commands. Soldiers ran past her as drones circled overhead. Blasts shook the ground again and again. The air smelled of burning metal. The inner shields brightened as new power surged into them. The outer towers collapsed seconds later, but the inner grid held strong. For now, Arya looked around. The officers were still panicking. No one had a clear plan. Communications were breaking apart. Several lieutenants were injured or missing. She climbed onto a damaged transport crate to get a better view. In every direction, chaos spread. Fires burned. Civilians screamed. Troops were scattered. She could not wait for orders. Her instincts took over. She shouted to a group of soldiers nearby, "Form 2 lines and cover the north side." "The enemy drones are circling that direction?" The soldiers hesitated, unsure whether to listen to her. A drone suddenly darted toward them. Arya grabbed a fallen rifle and fired. The shot hit the drone directly, sending it crashing to the ground. The soldiers stared at her, shocked. "Do what she says!" One of them yelled. They quickly moved into formation. Arya jumped down and ran to another group. She directed them toward the west barricade. She guided civilians to safety. She pointed out weak spots in the defense. She warned soldiers of incoming drones before they attacked. Everywhere she went, she created order where there had been chaos. Soldiers who had ignored her earlier now relied on her. Officers who had dismissed her now shouted for her advice, but the enemy was strong. More ships entered the sky. More drones swarmed the base. Arya saw the shield generator tower starting to flicker. If it fell, the entire colony would be exposed. She ran toward it, dodging debris and jumping over broken panels. She climbed the ladder to the top platform and reached the control panel. A stray blast hit the tower, shaking it violently. Arya held on and kept working. She redirected the power flow, adjusted the stabilizer, and realigned the energy stream. Her fingers moved quickly. Remembering everything her mother had taught her, the tower's glow steadied, the shields strengthened. A wave of relief washed through the colony, but the battle was far from over. The Karvex began preparing a second wave. Larger ships appeared on the horizon, their outlines sharp against the sky. Arya looked at them with steady eyes. She knew the first wave had only been a test. The real attack was coming. She climbed down from the tower and walked back toward the base entrance. Soldiers looked at her with a mixture of fear and respect. She took a deep breath. The official records had called her inexperienced, but tonight, the battlefield had seen the truth, and it was not done with her yet. The smoke from the first wave of explosions still drifted across the colony when Arya Velen reached the center of the base. Fires burned in several buildings, sending long shadows across the ground. Soldiers rushed back and forth, some carrying the injured, others dragging damaged equipment away from falling debris. The air was thick with dust and the sharp smell of melted metal. Arya stood still for a moment, taking in everything. Her heart pounded, but her mind was clear. The enemy had struck hard, but the colony was still standing. Only because she had forced everyone to act. Only because she had listened to the small warnings no one else believed, but she knew this was just the beginning. She turned toward the temporary command station near the plaza. Several officers stood there, shouting into broken communication devices. When Arya approached, they all looked up at her at the same time. Their faces carried shock, exhaustion, and something new respect. One of the younger officers stepped toward her. His face was dirty from smoke, and his voice shook slightly. "Cadet Arya, your decisions earlier saved the inner shield. If you hadn't redirected the power—" Another officer, older and more serious, finished his sentence. "This colony would have fallen within minutes." Arya gave a small nod. She was not looking for praise. "We don't have time. The second wave is coming." The officers exchanged quick glances. None of them questioned her words. They all knew she was right. The senior officer gestured toward the main screen. "Our commander is unconscious. Communications with the nearest fleet are weak. Half our lieutenants are missing or out of position. We don't have a clear chain of command." Arya's eyes hardened. "Then we need to create one," he frowned. "Cadet, you are not trained for command." Another explosion shook the ground as if answering him. Alarms blared again. A frightened civilian ran past them, crying. Arya did not raise her voice, but her words were firm. "Sir, training won't matter if we don't survive the next hour. We need fast, smart decisions. I've studied their movement patterns for days. I understand their strategy better than anyone here." The senior officer hesitated, then looked around at the chaos around them, the broken shields, the injured soldiers, the burning buildings. Finally he nodded once. "Very well, tell us what to do." Arya wasted no time. She stepped forward, her eyes moving across the holographic map of the colony. "The enemy is testing our weak points before the real assault. They're using drones to distract us and force us to spread our forces too thin." She pointed toward 3 specific areas. "These zones are the most vulnerable. If they break through here, here, or here, we lose the core facility under the base." One officer frowned. "The enemy wants the energy core?" Arya nodded. "Yes, that's their target. That core is powerful technology. If the Karvex take it, they can use it against every human colony in this region." Silence fell over the group. Arya continued. "We need to regroup. No scattered defense lines. Bring all surviving squads into tight units. Use the natural canyons on the east side as traps. Force the enemy to funnel into narrow paths. We can control them there." The younger officer spoke quickly. "What about civilians?" Arya answered immediately. "Move them to the underground shelters. Lock the 3rd level. Seal all entrance points. They'll be safest there." The senior officer took a deep breath, then shouted the orders across the plaza. Soldiers moved fast. Teams gathered injured allies, others carried weapons and supplies to new positions. A group of engineers ran to reinforce the power grid. Arya did not wait. She ran toward the eastern side of the colony with a group of soldiers following her. When she reached the canyon ridge, the wind was cold against her face. The canyon was long and narrow, with jagged walls on each side. Perfect for controlling enemy movement, she turned to the soldiers. "Place energy mines here, here, and here. Use half-charge settings. We want to slow them down, not blow everything at once." One soldier stared at her in confusion. "Half-charge? But that reduces damage." Arya shook her head. "We don't need damage yet. We need time. Slow them down long enough for our main units to reposition." The soldiers nodded and rushed to set the mines. Arya moved deeper into the canyon. She checked the terrain, memorized the angles, and listened to the faint hum of the wind against the rock. Her mother had taught her how to use the land, how to read open spaces like she read a map. Most people looked at land and saw dirt and stone. Arya looked at it and saw possibilities. She placed her hand against the canyon wall. "This will work," she whispered. A soldier approached her. His voice was nervous. "Cadet, We're getting reports of large ships entering the atmosphere. Arya's eyes sharpened. Then we don't have much time. She and the soldiers returned to the base as fast as they could. More drones filled the sky now, dark shapes buzzing like angry insects. The shields flickered under the pressure of their attacks. When Arya reached the command station again, officers surrounded her. "We've moved the civilians," one said. "We've formed 4 defensive squads." Another reported, "We've placed the energy mines in the canyons." A third added. Arya nodded. "Good, now we wait for the second wave. When they land, attack only when they enter the canyon path. Not before?" A loud rumble filled the air. Everyone looked up. 3 massive Carvex drop carriers tore through the clouds. Their engines glowed red. Their sharp metal wings stretched wide like predators ready to hunt. Arya's breath caught for a moment. These were not scouting ships. These were war machines. The carriers opened, releasing dozens of armored soldiers. Their dark bodies hit the ground with heavy metallic thuds. They moved quickly, their glowing visors scanning the area. The humans held their breath. Then, just as Arya predicted, the Carvex troops marched toward the canyons. "Hold," Arya whispered. The soldiers waited, hands shaking around their weapons. "Wait. Wait." The first wave of Carvex stepped over the energy mines. "Now!" Arya shouted. The mines exploded one by one, sending bright flashes through the canyon. The shockwaves threw the enemy soldiers off balance. Their formation broke. Arya pointed toward the ridge. "Second squad, cut them off." Energy. Beams rained down from above as human soldiers took their positions. The Carvex tried to climb the walls, but the narrow space trapped them. "Third squad, flank left." Arya ordered. The ground trembled as heavy rifles fired in controlled bursts. For a moment, the humans held the advantage. Arya saw an enemy soldier charging toward a wounded human soldier. She ran toward them without thinking. She blocked the attack with her rifle, pushed the enemy back, and fired. The enemy collapsed. The wounded soldier stared at her with wide eyes. "You saved me," he whispered. Arya helped him up. "Stay behind cover? You're injured." But their small victory did not last long. The Carvex began adapting. More troops entered the canyon. Their heavy units pushed through the traps. Their drones flew overhead, firing down on the ridge. Arya's heart raced. She raised her communicator. "Pull back to the second line. Don't let them surround you." But before her orders fully spread, the canyon walls shook. A new Carvex weapon fired from above, blasting through the ridge. Dust and debris fell everywhere. Several human soldiers were knocked down. Arya coughed, wiping the dust from her face. She looked around. The situation was changing fast. The Carvex had expected traps. They were ready, the officers back at the base shouted through her communicator. "Arya, the enemy is breaking through. We need a new plan." She looked at the canyon walls, at the falling rocks, at the advancing enemy. A new idea formed in her mind. "I know what to do," she said quietly. She raised her voice. "Everyone fall back toward the base. Lead them into the open field between the towers." One soldier yelled, "But we'll be exposed there." Arya shook her head. "No, the energy towers can be overloaded manually. If we trigger them at the right moment, the burst will hit the enemy, not us." The soldiers stared at her, stunned. "No one has ever tried that," an officer said. Arya's voice was calm. "Someone has to try it now." The soldiers retreated. The Carvex followed, believing the humans were running in fear. Arya ran ahead to the towers. She climbed the nearest one, her hands moving quickly across the controls. Sparks burst from the wires. The tower hummed loudly as she prepared the overload. 30 seconds. She shouted. The human soldiers held their line. The Carvex approached. 20 seconds. The air shook with tension. The enemy raised their weapons. 10 seconds. Arya yelled. The officers braced themselves. 3, 2, 1. Now! Arya slammed her hand onto the activation panel. A massive burst of light exploded outward. The energy wave shot through the open field, knocking the Carvex soldiers off their feet. Their weapons short-circuited. Their armor sparked wildly. The humans shielded their eyes from the blast. When the light faded, dozens of enemy troops lay motionless. The battlefield fell into stunned silence. Arya climbed down from the tower, her legs shaking slightly. Soldiers stared at her as she walked toward them. None of them spoke, then slowly, one soldier lowered his weapon and bowed his head to her. Another followed, then another, within moments. Every soldier in the field was looking at Arya with awe. She swallowed softly. "We don't have long before they send the next wave," she said. "We need to regroup and prepare." The officers nodded immediately. Arya looked toward the sky. Dark shapes hovered far beyond the clouds. She knew the enemy was not finished. And now they knew she existed. Arya moved through the dark canyon with a silent determination, her steps light and controlled as the sound of distant explosions echoed behind her. She knew the Karvek's attack would not stop, not now when they were so close to their goal. The soldiers who followed her moved carefully, trusting her without hesitation. They had seen her predictions come true again and again. They had watched her act faster than anyone else. She had earned their belief. The night air trembled with the hum of alien engines. Arya looked up and saw faint shadows of Karvek's craft cutting across the low clouds. Her eyes narrowed. She studied their formation, noting their angles and speed. They were heading toward the ridge, the same ridge where she had hidden a squad to ambush them. Her instincts told her the Karveks expected resistance there, which meant they were preparing something bigger. She whispered a warning into her communicator. The squad acknowledged and fell back before the enemy arrived. Moments later, the ridge was struck with a barrage of plasma blasts that lit the sky in blinding blue light. If her soldiers had stayed, they would have been vaporized. The soldiers around her looked at her with awe. Arya did not smile or show pride. She simply turned away and continued forward. She could not afford to be distracted by their admiration. Lives depended on her. Every second mattered. Ahead of her, the rocky path led toward the edge of the Karvek's drop zone. They had landed several heavy carriers there, and Arya needed to destroy or disable them before the next wave of reinforcements arrived. If she failed, the colony would fall. The group reached a cluster of boulders, overlooking the clearing where alien machines worked tirelessly. The Karvek's troops moved with a cold, perfect rhythm. They carried crystalline weapons that pulsed with a strange internal light, and their armored bodies reflected the glow of their ships. Arya watched their movements carefully. Their positions, their reactions, the gaps between them, everything mattered. She crouched and spoke quietly to her soldiers. She told them how they would move, who would attack first, who would fire at which point, and where they would retreat if overwhelmed. Her instructions were simple but precise. Her soldiers listened with full focus. Not one questioned her plan when she gave the signal. The battle began. Human rifles fired streaks of white energy into the clearing. Karvek's troops reacted instantly, turning their heads in perfect unison. But Arya had anticipated this reaction. She directed her soldiers to shift positions before the aliens adjusted their aim. They vanished behind rocks, reappeared at the flank, then vanished again. The Karveks fired back with deadly accuracy, but Arya's troops followed her movements like a dance. Every time the aliens thought they had the humans trapped, Arya had already moved them into a new angle. Her voice remained calm on the communicator, guiding them through every second. She moved along the ridge, sliding down a path to approach the enemy from the side. She kept low, using shadows to hide her presence. She reached the base of a heavy carrier and placed an explosive device on its power conduit. She activated the timer and slipped away without a sound. Seconds later, the carrier exploded in a massive burst of violet flame. The shockwave threw dust into the sky, and alien soldiers stumbled in confusion. Arya used that moment to signal her squad to advance. They seized the upper ground and forced the enemy backward. The Karveks regrouped quickly and pushed forward again. Their leader, a towering figure with advanced armor, stepped through the smoke. It carried a spear-like weapon that cracked with blue electricity. It pointed toward Arya as if recognizing her. She felt a chill on her skin but did not step back. She fired at the creature, hitting its armor, but it barely flinched. Her soldiers tried to flank it, but the leader moved with terrifying speed, sweeping its weapon in a wide arc that sent them diving for cover. Arya knew she had to distract it. She threw a small flash device toward the creature. It exploded in bright, white light, causing the alien to stumble. She used that moment to run directly toward it, dodging its strike and sliding beneath its arm. She fired upward at the exposed joint in its armor. The alien roared in pain and staggered. Her soldiers used the distraction to unleash a wave of fire. The alien leader finally collapsed with a heavy crash, and the battlefield fell into a brief silence. Arya took a deep breath. She had no time to celebrate. There were still 2 more carriers active, and they were preparing to lift off and deploy additional troops. She signaled her squad to follow and advanced toward the next one. They moved through debris and smoke, reaching the second carrier's ramp. Karvek's defenders stood guard, firing relentlessly. Arya led the charge, weaving through their shots with sharp, unpredictable steps. She reached the ramp and used her rifle as a defensive tool while delivering a series of precise shots inside the carrier. Alien pilots shouted in their harsh language. Arya sprinted toward the cockpit and disabled the controls with quick energy blasts. The ship crashed sideways, sparks flying as it fell. Outside, her soldiers cheered and held their ground. But Arya stopped them immediately. She sensed something. A faint vibration beneath her feet. A shift in the air. She turned sharply toward the final carrier. It was powering up to release something. Something massive. The ground trembled as the carrier's doors opened. A towering war machine stepped out. A Karvek's Titan-class walker, something she had only seen in classified files. It glowed with an eerie light, its limbs armored with layered plates that pulsed like living metal. Her soldiers hesitated. Fear spread through them. Arya stepped forward. She told them the Titan had weaknesses. She had studied its structure long before this day. She explained where to aim, how to avoid its primary weapons, and how to break its defensive field. Her voice steadied them. They trusted her. The Titan fired a beam of energy that sliced a deep scar across the canyon wall. Arya dodged it by inches. She gave orders rapidly, directing her soldiers to spread out. The Titan struggled to target so many moving figures. She climbed onto a ledge and shot at one of its glowing joints. Sparks flew. The Titan turned toward her, locking its aim. She jumped off the ledge just as it unleashed another beam that shattered the rock behind her. Her soldiers fired at the Titan's legs, weakening its supports. Arya threw an energy grenade into a crack in its armor. The explosion sent the Titan staggering. It tried to stabilize, but she jumped onto its knee and climbed toward its control core. The Titan shook violently. She gripped its armor tightly, climbing with determination. She reached the glowing core at its chest. Without hesitation, she fired directly into it. A surge of light burst from the Titan, its systems overloaded, and it collapsed with a thunderous crash. The battlefield fell silent again. This time, truly silent. Her soldiers stared at her. Their fear had turned into absolute belief. She had done what no one else could. She had destroyed a Titan with sheer will and precise knowledge. Arya stood among the wreckage, breathing heavily but standing tall. She knew the battle was not over. The Karveks were regrouping elsewhere. Another attack would come, but now she had proven something to herself. To her soldiers and to the entire battlefield, she was no longer the inexperienced girl written in the official records. She was the force that stood between humanity and destruction, and she was just getting started. The battlefield was quiet after the fall of the Titan. Smoke drifted slowly across the broken ground, glowing faintly from the fires still burning beneath it. Arya stood at the center of the wreckage, her armor scratched and marked, her breath deep and steady. The silence felt heavy. It felt like the calm after a storm, but she knew better. This calm was only a moment. The war was not over. Her soldiers gathered around her, their faces tired but full of admiration. They spoke softly among themselves, telling each other how she had defeated the Titan, how she had led them through impossible odds, how she had seen the enemy's attacks before they even happened. Arya listened quietly. She did not need the praise. She only needed to make sure they survived what was coming next. She stepped onto a large piece of broken metal and scanned the horizon. The sky above Xyrian 6 was still dark with clouds, lit by faint blinking lights of distant alien craft. The Carvex had been forced back after the fall of the Titan, but they were not gone. She could feel it. Years of hidden training from her mother had sharpened her instincts. She felt the pressure in the air. The pattern of the battle was shifting. A faint vibration reached her through the ground. She closed her eyes and listened. The soldiers around her watched her curiously. She raised her hand to signal for silence. The vibration grew stronger, like footsteps of something massive moving underground. Arya opened her eyes. She turned to her lieutenant, who waited anxiously for her decision. She told him to gather the remaining squads and move them toward the eastern cliffs. They obeyed without question. She had earned their trust so completely that a single word from her was enough to send them moving. The cliffs overlooked a deep valley, where the colony's hidden energy core was stored. Arya knew the Carvex were after that core. They wanted its power. They wanted to use it to strengthen their war machines and expand their reach into human space. She had prevented them from taking it earlier, but the enemy was not giving up. As she and her troops headed toward the cliffs, the ground shook again. This time louder, stronger, and more focused. The soldiers looked at each other nervously. Arya kept walking. Her steps remained calm. They reached the cliff edge just as the ground below cracked open. A massive platform rose from beneath the surface. A Carvex command ship hidden underground emerged from the valley floor. Its size dwarfed anything they had seen before. Its hull was covered in glowing symbols, and its engine lights spread like blue fire across the valley. The soldiers gasped. Arya felt a mix of shock and recognition. This ship was no ordinary transport. It was a war council vessel, used only when the Carvex wanted to personally oversee a battle. For them to bring such a ship here meant they considered her a serious threat. A ramp unfolded from the side of the ship. Several tall Carvex commanders stepped out, their armor sharp, polished, and marked with high-rank insignias. They moved with slow, deliberate confidence. Then another figure emerged behind them, a Carvex strategist. Taller than the rest, carrying a staff glowing with unstable energy, the strategist stared up at Arya. It did not speak. Its glowing eyes studied her like she was a puzzle he had not yet solved. The soldiers behind her tightened their grips on their weapons. Some whispered in fear. Arya raised her hand again for silence. She stepped closer to the cliff edge and met the strategist's gaze. Without blinking, the strategist lifted its staff slightly. The ground trembled in response. In a deep, vibrating voice, it spoke in translated English through its device. It said that humans had surprised them. It said that Arya's strategies were not expected. It said she fought with the same unpredictable brilliance as the human commander. They once respected Arya's mother. Her breath caught for a moment. Her mother's name was not spoken lightly, even among humans. But the Carvex knowing about her brought a cold understanding to Arya's mind. Her mother's death had been no accident. The Carvex had studied her, learned from her. And now they saw Arya as the continuation of that threat. The strategist tilted its head and said humans should surrender. It offered a chance for them to live if Arya gave herself up. Her soldiers turned to her in alarm. They whispered for her not to listen. They told her she had saved them and they would not abandon her. Arya looked at each of them. Their eyes were full of trust. They believed in her, not because of her record, but because of what she had done here. Arya stepped forward and shouted back across the valley. Her voice echoed off the cliffs. She said humans did not surrender. She said humans fought for each other, for their homes, for their futures. She said the Carvex would not take this world. The strategist lowered its staff slowly. It was not angry. It almost looked respectful. But respect did not stop war. The battle began again. The command ship fired dense energy bolts toward the cliffs. Arya ordered her troops to scatter. The blasts struck the rock, breaking massive portions of the cliff and sending dust clouds into the sky. Arya slid down the side of the cliff and signaled her squads to take positions along the valley walls. Her soldiers followed with confidence. They moved quickly and without fear. Arya guided them through the chaos, predicting each strike. She watched the command ship's patterns, its timing, the angle of each shot. She understood the rhythm within minutes. She directed her forces to fire at the ship's exposed joints, forcing it to shield those areas. She told them when to fall back and when to advance. Every move she made pushed the enemy closer to defeat, but the strategist was clever. It reactivated underground generators that powered a defensive field around the valley. The entire area glowed with a shimmering blue dome. Human weapons could not break through it. Arya knew what she had to do. She told her lieutenant to lead the soldiers to a safer zone and keep the enemy distracted. She herself moved toward the base of the defensive field. She found the energy towers channeling power into the dome. They were heavily guarded. She moved quickly, using shadows to hide her presence. She climbed the rocks, slid across narrow ledges, and approached the first tower. She placed an explosive charge against its core. The explosion sent a shockwave through the valley, and the defensive field flickered. The strategist screamed in its own language and ordered its troops to stop her. Arya did not stop. She ran toward the second tower, dodging enemy fire. She reached it and struck the core with precise rifle shots. Sparks erupted, and the blue dome weakened further. The command ship fired multiple beams at her, but she rolled behind rocks and kept moving. She reached the third tower, grabbed onto its metal frame, and climbed to its top. Energy crackled beneath her hands. She aimed her rifle at the central coil and fired again and again. The third tower exploded. The defensive dome collapsed completely. Her soldiers saw their chance. They unleashed a final wave of fire toward the command ship. Arya joined them, sprinting to higher ground and firing with intense determination. The command ship struggled to stay stable. Its engines whined loudly. The strategist shouted in frustration as its systems overloaded. Arya aimed at the main power core of the ship. She waited for the right moment. When the ship shifted its shield just slightly, she fired. The bullet struck the core. The ship erupted in a massive explosion that lit the entire valley. The shockwave knocked her backward, and the ground shook violently. But she held her balance. When the light faded, the command ship was in flames. The remaining Karvek soldiers fled into the darkness. Her soldiers cheered. They shouted her name again and again. The battle was over. Reinforcement fleets arrived soon after. They expected to find ruins, but instead they found Arya standing strong, her troops alive, and the colony still in human hands. The officials reviewed her actions. They rewrote her record completely. They listed every life she saved, every strategy she created, every impossible victory she achieved. The next morning, Arya stood alone on the quiet battlefield. She looked at the rising sun over Zyrian 6. She thought of her mother, and of the legacy she had now continued. She was no longer the inexperienced girl from the official files. She was the one who had changed the course of a war. She was the proof of what a human could become when the battlefield demanded greatness. And far beyond the stars, the Karveks began to speak her name with caution and with respect.